A man doesn't get a deal like that, less he's buying something cursed. Martha Duval. The wind howled across Red Hollow, like it carried warnings only a fool would ignore. Jack Mercer stood on the courthouse steps, the sun burning low over the horizon, dust twisting in the fading light. The crowd was already gathered, men in frayed hats, women clutching shawls, children peeking out from behind their mothers' skirts. The air carried a strange stillness. It wasn't the kind that came before a storm. It was the kind that came before a hanging. The auctioneer's voice cracked against the quiet. Starting bid, 25 cents. Cabin on Dead Man's Ridge, 12 acres, a working well, one corral roof in need of repair. Jack had ridden nearly 50 miles to this nothing of a town, saddle sore and dead tired, and this deal was the first thing that didn't feel like a curse. Land meant something. A fresh start meant something more. He raised his hand. The crowd didn't move. 25 cents, the auctioneer repeated, his tone hollow. Going once. Jack scanned their faces. Not a single man flinched. Not one raised hand. A man with boots caked in mud spat in the dirt and shook his head. Another pulled his hat low like he didn't want to see what came next. Going twice, the auctioneer called. That's when she stepped forward. Martha Duval, an old woman with skin weathered like canyon stone and eyes sharp as broken glass. She gripped the edge of her shawl like it might keep her from shaking apart. She leaned close enough that Jack could smell the bitter root she chewed. A man doesn't get a deal like that, she rasped. Less he's buying something cursed. Jack opened his mouth to ask what she meant, but the gavel cracked like a rifle shot. Sold, the auctioneer said, voice trembling. Sold to Mr. Jack Mercer for 25 cents. The silence that followed didn't feel like victory. It felt like someone had just nailed shut a coffin. As the crowd began to break apart, no one congratulated him. No handshakes, no smiles. They just dispersed, drifting away like smoke. But not far. No. They stayed on the edges of the street, watching him with pity, as if he'd already signed away something more precious than land. The courthouse clerk handed him the deed with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Jack tucked the folded paper into his coat, forcing a grin he didn't feel. It's just a house, he muttered to himself. Ain't no such thing as cursed land. But as he looked up, every pair of eyes still on him said otherwise. That evening, the sun bled out behind the red mesas. Jack mounted his horse, a gray gelding named Whiskey, and rode north out of town. The trail cut through dry brush and brittle pines, winding toward Dead Man's Ridge, a stretch of land so empty, the wind itself sounded lonely. The land was cheap for a reason. He knew that much. Folks in Red Hollow were the kind that believed in ghosts in bad blood, in the kind of stories whispered over whiskey after midnight. Jack Mercer didn't believe in stories. He believed in sweat and grit, and the kind of hard work that left scars on a man's hands. But as the ridge came into view, his gut twisted anyway. The cabin sat like a wound on the earth, tilted slightly, roof-sagging chimney cracked but still standing. Tall grass swallowed the corral fence. A rusted lantern hung from the porch beam, swaying gently in the evening wind like someone had left it there yesterday. It should have looked abandoned. It didn't. Whiskey stamped nervously, ears flicking back. Jack dismounted slowly, his boots crunching against the brittle earth. He ran a hand along the porch railing. No rot. No soft give. Someone had oiled this wood not that long ago. Yeah, Jack muttered under his breath. That's really normal. He pushed the cabin door open. It didn't groan like an old door should. It moved smoothly, almost too smooth. Dust hung in the air like suspended breath, swirling in pale ribbons through the fading light. A table sat against one wall with two chairs tucked in neat. A fireplace loomed opposite ashes cold, but still shaped like someone had banked the fire carefully before walking away. Jack's boots creaked against the floorboards as he moved farther inside. It wasn't the walls or the cold, or even the stillness that got him. It was the feeling. Like the house itself was waiting. Then he saw it. A perfect square in the middle of the floor. Boards cut tight, sealed at the edges, with something black hardened like tar. Not cracked, not warped, not old. Jack knelt, ran his fingers along the seam. Whoever sealed it had meant for it to stay that way forever. A cold shiver slid down his spine. Someone wanted to bury the truth, he whispered. Not just hide it. The wind outside shifted. The door creaked slightly behind him. Jack's head snapped up. Through the grimy window, the tree line blurred in the dying light. A shadow sat astride a horse, still silent, watching. Even at a distance, Jack could tell the rider wasn't lost. He was hiding, waiting. Their eyes met through the glass, and then the rider turned, disappearing into the pines without a sound. Jack stood slowly, every muscle coiled. The last time someone had watched him like that, it had been in another town, another life, a gunfight at dawn. And it had ended bloody. He checked his revolver out of habit. Loaded. 6 shots. Not much against shadows. By the time he stepped back outside, night was starting to roll in over the ridge. Coyotes barked somewhere far off. The air smelled like dry dirt and the sharp edge of pine. He untied whiskey from the post and patted the gelding's neck. "Looks like we ain't alone out here, boy," Jack said softly. The horse shifted uneasily. Jack scanned the tree line again. No movement. But he could feel it, eyes still on him even if he couldn't see them. Maybe it was just nerves. Maybe Martha's warning had dug deeper into his head than he'd like to admit. Either way, something about this place wasn't right. He lit the old lantern hanging from the porch. The warm light cut through the dark, just enough to make the shadows feel closer. He sat down on the porch step with his back against the post, revolver resting on his thigh, watching the line where forest met clearing. This wasn't how a man was supposed to feel after buying land. He should have been thinking about repairs, cattle fencing. Instead, he was counting gunshots in his head. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped. Jack didn't move. Another snap. Closer this time. He raised the revolver slowly. "Come on then," he muttered. The night stayed quiet. Nothing came out of the trees. Eventually, the sound faded. The wind shifted again, cold this time, carrying the faint smell of something he couldn't quite name. Not death, not rot, just old. He tightened his grip on the revolver. When he finally stepped back inside the cabin, it was with the kind of caution a man learns from years on the road. He checked the corners, the door latch, the windows. Nothing. No movement. But that square in the floor was still there, waiting. He didn't sleep. He sat by the cold hearth, staring at that sealed patch of wood until the moonlight slipped across it like a blade. He didn't know why the town had let this land sit for 15 years. He didn't know why someone was watching from the trees. He didn't know why the air inside this cabin felt thick with something unspoken. But he would find out. At dawn, Jack mounted whiskey and headed back down the trail toward Red Hollow. He needed tools, supplies, and answers. Whatever lay beneath that floor wasn't going to stay buried much longer. Behind him, the cabin stood in the early light, quiet and still. But if anyone had been watching, they'd have seen the door shift slightly, as if someone or something had been standing behind it all night. Jack's decision to return to town for tools and answers sets up the next chapter, where he'll encounter the locals' fear, the first offer from Eli Ramsey, and the deepening mystery around the sealed floor. The general store bell jangled as Jack Mercer stepped through the door, dust trailing from his boots. He'd ridden straight from the ridge, sun barely cresting over the horizon, the sleep-deprived ache still grinding in his spine. He hadn't slept. Couldn't really. Not after what he'd found in that cabin, especially not after seeing that rider disappear into the trees like a ghost. The store was quiet. Too quiet. A thin man behind the counter looked up from a box of dry beans. His mustache twitched like it wanted to say something before his mouth did. He offered a tight nod. "Mornin'." Jack returned it. "I need some supplies. Pry bar hammer nails. Maybe a lantern if you got one that doesn't leak oil." The man stared a second too long before moving. Jack could hear the nervous rattle in the man's hands as he grabbed the items, placing them one by one on the counter, like he didn't want them touching. There was a tremor in the air, like the whole town was holding its breath again. Jack reached into his coat and laid down a few coins. "Fixin' up a place. Dead Man's Ridge." The reaction was instant. A woman by the fabric shelf dropped her sewing tin spools and needles scattered across the wood floor like spilled secrets. An old-timer sitting near the stove stopped rocking his pipe falling from the corner of his mouth. Jack turned, scanning the room. Every eye was locked on him, and not a damn one looked surprised. The storekeeper swallowed voice barely above a whisper. "That'll be $2. Jack paid slowly, packing the tools into a canvas bag. As he did, the bell above the door rang again. Bootsteps, slow, heavy. Jack didn't turn around. He already knew who it was. He recognized the sound, the gait of a man who walked like his boots didn't fear anything, or anyone. A familiar voice cut through the air like a cold knife. $500. Cash. No questions asked. Walk away before this place swallows you. Jack turned. The man stood tall, wiry, with a sharpness to his face that made him look carved from rawhide. His coat was dark, worn smooth at the edges, and the silver-banded hat was unmistakable. Eli Ramsey. Same man from the trees. Same man from the auction. Jack didn't flinch. "That's a mighty generous offer for a busted-up cabin." Eli offered a half-smile that never touched his eyes. "I'm a generous man when it comes to peace of mind. And that cabin doesn't bring peace. Just problems. History folks around here prefer staying buried." The old man by the stove finally found his voice. "You do well to listen, son." But Jack wasn't the listening kind, not when he hadn't even asked the questions yet. "What's under that floor?" he asked. "Because I ain't ever seen a town this jumpy over wood and nails." Eli leaned on the counter, his voice low but clear. "I've been watching that place for 15 years, making sure nobody disturbs what should stay undisturbed. You think this is about property?" He dropped a leather pouch on the counter, heavy with coins. "That's $500, Mercer. Final offer." Jack stared at the bag, then at the faces in the room. Every single one pleading without words, "Take it. Leave. Forget." But it was Eli's eyes that gave it away, not fear, but desperation. "Nobody offers 20 times what something's worth unless they're scared of what's inside it," Jack said, backing toward the door. Eli's jaw twitched. "That'd be unwise." Jack held his gaze. "Are you threatening me?" Eli didn't blink. "I'm trying to save your life." The room went still again, like it had the day before when the gavel came down. But before Eli could press further, the sound of hooves thundered outside. 3 riders. Fast. The store's front window blurred as dust rose and the door flew open. Jack instinctively reached for the revolver beneath his coat, but didn't draw. These men weren't local. You could tell from the coats, too clean, too trimmed. The one in front wore a deputy's badge, but the kind that didn't shine from use. The second looked like a banker who'd never seen dirt. The third never took his hand off his gun. The banker spoke first. "Tobias Whitmore," he said casually, though he wasn't talking to Jack. He looked at Eli. "Thought we had an understanding." Eli straightened. "I offered fair money." He refused. Tobias gave a short laugh. "You offered enough to buy a whole ranch. Don't you think that might make him curious?" Why, Jack raised a brow. "Getting really tired of folks speaking about me instead of me." The deputy stepped forward. "Let's cut through it, Mercer. Have you opened the floor yet?" It landed like a slap. Everyone froze. Even the storekeeper backed away from his own counter. "What floor?" Jack asked, though the question was already pointless. Tobias narrowed his eyes. "Don't play dumb. The sealed section. Everyone who's ever been in that cabin notices it. That's why no one's lived there since Hartwell." "Hartwell," Jack repeated. "Samuel Hartwell," Eli said. "He owned that cabin 15 years ago. Found something buried deep in county records, something about fraudulent land sales. He was gonna expose it." "What happened to him?" Tobias looked away. The deputy muttered, "Shot in the back. Never made it to town." "And whatever he found," Eli added, "he hid it. Under that floor." Jack looked between them. "So why not take it yourselves?" Eli shook his head. "He sealed it with more than nails. He locked it with law. Couldn't be touched unless sold legally. Nobody's touched that cabin since the day he died." "Until you did," Tobias said coldly. Jack felt it then, the weight of it all. The auction hadn't been a fluke. It was bait. And he'd taken it. Outside, the hoofbeats from earlier had faded, but the silence left in their wake felt louder. This wasn't just about land. This was about power. And Jack had just wandered into the middle of it. "You still don't get it," Eli said, voice low. "Someone's been waiting for years to find out if Hartwell's papers survived. Someone who'll kill to make sure they never see daylight." Jack glanced down at the tools he'd bought. He hadn't realized until this moment how heavy they'd feel, or how much they'd cost. He adjusted the strap over his shoulder, looked at Tobias, then Eli. "You want what's under that floor? Then maybe you should have bought it." He turned and walked out the door, leaving silence behind him. He didn't look back, but he felt it, every pair of eyes burning into his spine. And somewhere out there, past the ridge and the trees, the man who had killed Samuel Hartwell was probably already on his way. Because now Jack Mercer had seen it. And like Eli had said, someone wanted to bury the truth, not just hide it. As Jack mounted whiskey and turned back toward the cabin, a voice stopped him. It was quiet. From behind the saloon, "Mr. Mercer," the woman said, "you don't know me, but I think you ought to see something." Nina Reyes stepped into the light, holding a weathered envelope. "It's time you knew what Hartwell found," she said. Nina Reyes reveals the deeper history of Samuel Hartwell and the true nature of what lies under the floor. The alley behind the saloon was soaked in shadows, the kind that didn't move when the wind blew. Jack Mercer stood just beyond the reach of the lamplight hand, resting casually on the grip of his revolver. He didn't trust many people, especially strangers who waited in dark places, but something about Nina Reyes made him stay. She stepped forward, moonlight catching in her dark braid. Her dress was simple but worn with a grace that made it look like something regal. In her hand, she held a weathered envelope, creased, faded, and sealed with wax long broken. "He gave this to me the day before he died," she said softly. "Said if anything happened to him, someone would come looking. He made me promise not to open it unless someone asked the right question." Jack narrowed his eyes. "And what's the right question?" Nina stared at him a moment, searching his face. "You didn't ask for it." Jack opened his mouth, then closed it again. "But you looked like a man who needs to know the truth," she added, stepping closer. "So here." She handed him the envelope. Her fingers brushed his. Cold. Jack opened it slowly. Inside was a single page, yellowed but legible. "If you're reading this, I'm probably dead. S.H." The rest was handwritten in careful script. A short note. "They're stealing land through forged deeds, selling it twice, 3 times under different names. Judge Crane signs off. Whitmore collects the cash. The governor himself is behind it all. I've hidden everything: maps, letters, copies of transactions. It's under the cabin, locked tight. If I don't make it, someone has to finish what I started. Just be careful who you trust." Samuel Hartwell. Jack let out a long breath. His fingers curled tighter around the page. Nina was watching him. "Now you know." He nodded slowly. "He was murdered for this." "They all knew," she said, voice like wind through broken glass. "And nobody did a damn thing." A silence stretched between them. Then Jack folded the letter and tucked it inside his coat. "I have to open that floor." "No," Nina said sharply, surprising him. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Not yet," she added. "Not without backup. If you break that seal, they'll come for you. Fast and hard. They already are." She stepped back into the shadows, like part of her belonged there. "Then you'd better find someone with a longer rifle and shorter patience." Jack glanced toward the saloon. Inside, music played a low, sad fiddle tune with more ghosts than melody. But he wasn't heading back inside. Not yet. His boots turned toward the street. "I'll be back," he said. "Try to be breathing when you do," she replied. He didn't look back. He found Eli Ramsey exactly where he figured he would, lean against the fence post outside the sheriff's office like he belonged to the shadows themselves. "You come to reconsider?" Eli asked, flipping a coin between his fingers. "500's still good." Jack stopped 3 paces away. "You watched that cabin for 15 years. Why?" Eli caught the coin midair, his hand closing around it like a snake strike. "Because Hartwell was my friend." That wasn't the answer Jack expected. Eli continued, voice low. "We rode together, fought in the same unit. He was the best man I ever knew until he got involved in things no man should touch. You knew what he found, I helped him find it." Eli's face hardened. "Told him to burn it. He didn't listen. Thought the truth mattered more than survival." Jack stepped closer. "He trusted you." Eli nodded once, right up until the bullet in his back. Jack let that sink in. "I'm opening that floor. Tonight." Eli studied him for a long moment. "Then you're either real brave or real stupid." Jack didn't blink. "Are you in or not?" For a moment, silence. Then Eli reached inside his coat and pulled out a sawed-off shotgun. "Let's go piss off some powerful people." The trail back to Dead Man's Ridge was quieter this time, but no less heavy. Moonlight lit the path in pale silver, casting the land in stark relief. When the cabin came into view, Jack half expected to see torches riders fire. But the place sat still, waiting. He pushed open the door, The floor creaked in greeting. Eli followed behind him, eyes scanning every shadow. No footprints, no fresh tracks. We're alone. Jack didn't believe it for a second. He knelt by the sealed square, pulled the pry bar from his pack. The dark resin crackled as it split beneath the metal. One board came loose, then another. Eli watched silently, shotgun resting on his shoulder like an afterthought. The last board popped free with a groan. Beneath a cavity, dry, carefully constructed. Inside a leather satchel and a metal lockbox, both coated in dust untouched. Jack reached in and lifted them free. The lockbox was heavy coins, maybe, but it was the satchel that felt important. He unbuckled it. Inside were papers, dozens of them, seals, signatures, maps, letters. Eli leaned in. You just opened a coffin, Mercer. Jack flipped to the first page. To Judge Walter Crane, re-expedited land claim approval regarding parcels 14B through 21F. Governor Monroe's seal at the bottom. Another letter. Whitmore's handwriting bragging about the triple sale of the same lot. Another Sheriff Cal's signature approving false witness statements. Jack's hands shook. This is enough to hang half the territory, he whispered. Eli said nothing, just lit a cigarette with slow, deliberate movements. The smoke curled upward into the shadows above them. Outside, the wind picked up. Jack looked at him. What now? Eli exhaled. Now you try not to get killed before sunrise. A sudden noise outside. Hoofbeats. Eli dropped his cigarette and raised the shotgun. They're here. Jack shoved the documents into his coat. We need to go, now. Eli pointed to the back door. Horses are tied behind the ridge line. As they ran for the exit, Jack looked back once. The cabin sat open, exposed, and he knew then what Samuel must have known too late. Someone wanted to bury the truth, not just hide it. They burst into the open, the smell of horses and gun oil sharp in the night air. Jack vaulted into the saddle. Eli was already mounted. Riders crested the ridge behind them, 3, maybe 4. No badges, just guns and purpose. Jack dug in his heels. Whiskey surged forward. The chase was on. Where Jack seeks shelter and answers from Reverend Amos Blake and begins to uncover just how far back this conspiracy stretches. The church was dark, save for the flicker of a single oil lamp burning near the altar. Jack Mercer stepped through the creaking double doors, boots scraping against the warped floorboards. Rain tapped softly against the windows, thin, uncertain, like the sky itself was holding back. He closed the door behind him, shutting out the night, and the sound of hoofbeats still echoing in his bones. Reverend Amos Blake stood at the front of the sanctuary, back-turned, hands clasped behind him, like he'd been expecting the knock of trouble long before it came. His coat was faded black, the collar frayed. His white hair hung down over his shoulders, and his voice, when it came, was dry as ash. "You opened it, didn't you?" Jack hesitated. "You knew I would." The Reverend slowly turned his face lined with more than just age. Regret had a way of carving a man deeper than time ever could. "I buried the man who built that secret," Amos said, "and I've been praying for his ghost ever since." Jack stepped forward, reaching into his coat. He laid the leather satchel on the front pew, opened it, and pulled out one of the letters, creased, sealed with the governor's official mark. Amos looked at it like it might catch fire. "I didn't want to believe he was right," the Reverend muttered. But Samuel Hartwell wasn't right. He was too damn right. Jack glanced toward the windows, watching the shadows shift beyond the warped glass. "They're coming. Already tried once tonight. Then we don't have much time. Amos picked up the letter with trembling hands. Do you know what these are? Proof, Jack said. Every name, every signature, every lie stacked like timber ready to burn. The Reverend lowered himself into the pew, his hands shaking slightly. 15 years ago, Samuel came to me, said he'd found something buried in the county archives, something that tied together half the men in this town. Land sales that never existed, families displaced, money pocketed. At first I thought he was just chasing shadows. Jack sat across from him. He wasn't. No, Amos whispered. He wasn't. The lamplight flickered, casting long shadows against the walls, ghosts of men not yet dead. I told him to go to the marshal. He said he couldn't. Said the marshal was on the take, too. Told me he had only one option: expose it himself or leverage it into safety. Jack nodded. Blackmail. Amos flinched at the word. He didn't call it that. Said it was righteous pressure. Jack didn't argue. Whatever Hartwell had called it, it had gotten him killed. Amos continued, eyes distant. He was going to leave town that night, ride straight to Santa Fe with copies of everything. But he never made it. Shot in the back, Jack said quietly. Amos looked down. I found him myself, slumped over in the saddle just outside town. They buried him with a closed casket. Told everyone it was an accident, a fall. I never told the truth. Why? The Reverend's voice cracked. Because I was afraid. Because I knew if I spoke, I'd be next. Jack stood pacing slowly down the aisle. And now they know I have what Hartwell hid. Then you're in more danger than he ever was. The front door rattled suddenly. Jack's hand shot to his revolver. Amos didn't move. A quiet knock followed. 3 taps, then silence. Jack crossed to the door and opened it just enough to see the rain-slick hat of Nina Reyes. She stepped inside quickly, cloak-dripping eyes wide with urgency. They're watching every road out of Red Hollow, she said. I saw at least 6 men posted at the northern trail. They're waiting for you. Jack shut the door behind her. We need another way out. There might be one, Amos said slowly. The old mining trail behind the ridge. It's dangerous, half washed out, barely a path anymore. Wouldn't be the first time I rode through worse, Jack said. Nina looked at the satchel still lying open on the pew. You get all of it, enough to light up the entire territory. Amos stood. Then you need to get it to someone who'll actually use it. Jack met his eyes. You know someone in Santa Fe? The territorial marshal, Amos replied. Name's Clay Torrance. Served with him during the war. He's clean. If anyone can take this to trial, it's him. Nina stepped forward, eyes narrowing. Are you sure about that? Everyone's got a price these days. Not Clay, Amos said. He lost a brother to this mess. Killed in a land dispute 5 years ago. He's been waiting for proof ever since. Jack nodded. Then we get it for him. Amos walked to the altar and pulled open a hidden drawer beneath it. Inside was an old revolver, 6 bullets, and a small folded map. He handed the map to Jack. This'll get you to the mining trail. Jack took it and stuffed it inside his coat. You're not coming. I already made my peace, the Reverend said, but I'll slow them down if they come knocking. You sure? Amos smiled faintly. I've spent 15 years in silence. I can afford one loud night. Jack held out his hand. The old man took it strong despite the tremble. Thank you. Do me one favor, Amos said. Finish what Samuel started. Jack nodded once. I will. They stepped back out into the rain, Nina close behind. Lightning flickered across the distant hills, painting the town in ghost light. Jack mounted Whiskey. Nina swung up onto her own horse. As they rode toward the trail, Jack didn't look back, but he heard the church bell ringing once, then again. Slow, hollow, a warning, a farewell. They rode in silence until the buildings of Red Hollow faded behind them. "Why are you doing this?" Jack asked, voice barely above the rain. Nina's eyes stayed forward. "Because Samuel Hartwell was the only man in this town who ever told me the truth." Jack said nothing. The truth had a weight, and it was getting heavier by the mile. Rain poured harder, masking their tracks. The ridge loomed ahead, dark and jagged like the back of something ancient. "We make it to the mining trail," Jack said. "We've got a shot." Nina didn't answer, but Jack felt the air shift again, like the night itself was holding its breath. Somewhere behind them, another bell rang. This time it wasn't a warning. It was a call to war. Jack and Nina take the dangerous mining trail toward Dead Man's Ridge to open the sealed floor, now joined by Eli Ramsey. They find what Samuel Hartwell died to protect. The rain stopped an hour before dawn, leaving behind the sharp scent of wet earth and pine sap. Mist clung low to the ground, curling like smoke along the trail as Jack Mercer led his horse up the final rise. Behind him, Nina Reyes followed without a word, her face pale with fatigue, but her eyes steady. The ridge finally broke open, revealing the cabin, silent, weather-worn, and still standing, like it had been holding its breath for 15 years. They weren't alone. Eli Ramsey was already there, crouched beside the porch steps, with his shotgun balanced across his knees. He stood when he saw them, nodding once like they were late to a funeral. "The trail was rougher than I remember," Jack muttered, dismounting. Eli smirked. "Have you ever ridden that trail in the snow? That's when it gets real mean." Nina stepped up onto the porch without waiting for banter. "You sure no one followed?" Eli shook his head. "Been watching since midnight." "Ridge is quiet. If anyone's coming, they ain't here yet." Jack opened the cabin door and stepped inside. Cold air greeted him, stagnant, heavy with the weight of secrets too long sealed. He crossed the room to the exposed section of floor, where they'd removed the planks the night before. The satchel and lockbox sat where he'd hidden them beneath a loose board. Jack dropped to one knee. 15 years sealed, he muttered, brushing dust from the box, and it still reeks of secrets. He pried open the strongbox first. Inside, coins, hundreds of them. Silver, gold, old currency, minted in 3 different states, stacked carefully wrapped in cloth. Nina let out a low whistle. "How much do you think that is?" Jack didn't look up. "Enough to buy half of Red Hollow, maybe more." Eli leaned over the box. "That ain't the prize. Check the satchel." Jack opened it. Documents spilled onto the floor, in a quiet rustle of deeds, maps, contracts, letters sealed with wax and stamped with the official insignia of the New Mexico territorial government. Dozens of them. He picked up the top sheet. It was a land deed signed by Governor Thaddeus Monroe, dated 3 weeks before Samuel Hartwell's death, sold to 3 different buyers. Same parcel. Another sheet is a personal letter addressed to Judge Walter Crane. Jack read aloud, "Appreciate your continued discretion, Judge. Payment for the next round of titles will be delivered by courier. Burn after reading." Eli let out a sharp breath. And there it is. Jack's hand tightened around the paper. They weren't just selling stolen land. They were laundering the cash through the courts. Nina crouched beside them, picking through the pile. Here, this one's from Whitmore. Look at the signature. It was a receipt, handwritten. Silas Whitmore had taken $8,000 in cash for consulting fees, dated 4 days before Hartwell's death. Jack didn't need to do the math. The motive was staring him in the face. He found a final letter tucked near the bottom one, written in a different hand. Precise. Legal. Cold. To all parties involved in the Hartwell situation, eliminate the leak by any means necessary. Compensation has been arranged. It was signed. Thaddeus Monroe. Jack's jaw clenched. This is it, he said quietly. Everything. The room went silent. Nina stood, her voice tight. Then we need to ride. Now. But Jack was still staring at the floor. No, he said. Not yet. Eli raised an eyebrow. We got the proof, Mercer. What the hell else are you looking for? There's something missing, Jack muttered. Hartwell was careful. Too careful. These are good, but this isn't the core. This is support. He opened the false bottom of the strongbox. There, wrapped in oilcloth, were 5 more documents, smaller, sealed in wax. Jack opened one slowly. It was a letter of instruction, but not just to Crane or Whitmore. It was addressed to the governor by someone else. Jack's voice dropped to a whisper. Judge Crane wasn't the mastermind. He was just following orders. Nina's eyes narrowed. Who's above a governor? Jack read the name at the bottom of the letter. Signed USS Territorial Commissioner Elias R. Harper. A silence slammed into the room. Nina took a step back. That's Washington. Jack nodded, his mind spinning. This wasn't just a local con. It was a federal pipeline. Land grants approved in D.C., falsified in New Mexico, laundered through crooked judges, and sold to settlers 3 times over. Eli swore under his breath, and Hartwell found the source. Jack tucked the final letters back into the satchel. Now we know why they killed him, and why they'll kill us too. A sharp whistle echoed outside, 2 short bursts followed by one long. Eli stiffened. That's not birdsong. Jack moved fast, tossing the satchel to Nina. Ride north, head for Santa Fe. Stay off the main road. She blinked. What about you? I'll hold them here. Eli scoffed. You ain't holding off what's coming alone. I'm not, Mecca said. You're staying too. Eli grunted. Thought you'd never ask. Gunfire cracked outside. A bullet punched through the front window, sending glass spraying across the room. Jack dropped low and pulled his revolver. Eli darted to the side wall, eyes already on the shadows moving through the trees. Nina reached the back door. She hesitated. Jack looked at her. Get it to Marshal Torrance. Tell him everything. She met his gaze, then nodded. I'll see you on the other side. Then she was gone. Jack crouched beside the hearth, the revolver steady in his grip. Eli reloaded his shotgun and muttered, We're gonna die in a damn box. Jack smiled tightly. If we do, we'll die holding the truth. Another round tore through the front wall. Bootsteps thudded against the porch. Eli looked at Jack. Any last words? Jack raised his revolver. Yeah, let's make it cost them. Jack and Eli engage in a firefight as Nina races to Santa Fe. Along the way, she's intercepted and someone unexpected offers to help. The sun was barely above the horizon, a smear of burnt orange behind the jagged silhouette of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, when Nina Reyes crested the ridge on horseback. Her cloak whipped in the cold morning wind, the satchel pressed tightly to her chest, every bump in the trail hammering the weight of what she carried deeper into her bones. She hadn't looked back since leaving Jack and Eli behind at the cabin. She didn't want to think about whether they were alive or if the ridge now stood silent again, painted in blood. All she knew was this: she had to reach Santa Fe, had to find Marshal Clay Torrance, had to get the evidence into the right hands before Monroe's men found her. But she was already being hunted. She heard the first distant hoofbeats that echoed just a little too fast. Not casual travel, not ranchers. Pursuit. She urged her horse faster. The trail narrowed as it twisted into high desert terrain, the rocks turning jagged and loose underfoot. One wrong step would snap a leg and end the mission. Nina clenched her jaw, crouched low, and rode like every second counted, because it did. She reached a bend in the canyon, where a thin path cut sharply through a narrow pass. Her horse skidded, nearly slipping, but caught its footing and surged forward. Then she heard the whistle, a long, shrill sound followed by the unmistakable report of a rifle. The bullet kicked up dirt inches from her boot. "Damn it!" Another shot rang out. "This one is closer." She veered hard left and cut into the rocks, dismounting in one fluid motion and scrambling up the slope, the satchel slung over her shoulder. Hoofbeats thundered below. Shouts echoed through the pass. "You there, girl! Drop the bag and walk away!" a voice bellowed. She ducked behind a boulder chest, heaving. They knew exactly what she carried. Her fingers found the revolver at her hip. Small, snub-nosed, hardly a match for the rifles they were carrying. But it wasn't about winning a fight. It was about stalling long enough. A voice called again. Closer. "We don't want to shoot you, Nina." "Hell, Governor," Monroe said. "If you cooperate, there might even be a place for you." She peeked over the rock. 3 riders. One of them she recognized was Jeb Morrow, former deputy turned gun for hire. He was grinning like this was a game. Another bullet shattered stone inches from her head. She ducked back, biting off a curse. Then another voice. Rough, steady, familiar. "You boys are a long way from your jurisdiction." The gunfire stopped. Nina dared to peek again. A 4th horseman had appeared at the edge of the ridge, rifle raised, dark duster flapping in the wind. His face was aged, weathered, but sharp as a knife. "Marshal Clay Torrance." Morrow laughed. "Well, look who rode in from Legend." "Thought you retired, Clay." "I did," Torrance replied. "But then I heard folks were threatening to shoot a woman carrying government property. And that brings me out of bed." The other riders shifted uneasily. "You don't want to do this," Morrow warned. "You already did," the marshal said, and fired. His bullet hit the nearest rider square in the chest. The man toppled backward off his horse, lifeless, before he hit the ground. The canyon exploded with movement. Nina took the opportunity to run, ducking low and sprinting along the rocks toward where Torrance had appeared. Morrow returned fire. His last mistake. Torrance fired once more. Clean, efficient. Then there was only the wind and the stench of powder. Nina skidded to a stop beside him, heart pounding. "Marshal Torrance," she gasped. "You came." "I'd say you called, but this ain't exactly a polite invitation," he said, reloading his rifle calmly. "Word travels fast in this territory, especially when gunmen start riding after bartenders with satchels full of sins." She opened the flap and handed him one of the letters. His eyes scanned it, then narrowed. "Monroe's seal," he muttered. "And this is Judge Crane's signature." There's more. Letters. Deeds. Bank slips. Even federal orders signed by Elias Harper. Clay Torrance's face went still. "Harper," he said slowly, "you sure see for yourself." He did, and when he looked up, the humor was gone from his voice. "You're carrying proof of a federal conspiracy, miss. This ain't just territorial politics anymore. This is treason." "Jack and Eli stayed behind to buy me time," Nina said. "We have to go back for them." "No," Torrance said firmly. "We do this right. We move forward, not back." "I'm not leaving them. You want to save them," he interrupted. "Then you help me bring the whole damn system down. If we expose this the right way, we won't need bullets. We'll have indictments, trials, gallows." She hesitated, still breathing hard, then nodded. "All right," she said. "But we move fast. Because once Monroe finds out this evidence slipped through, he'll burn every witness to the ground." "Let him try," Torrance said. "I've been waiting a long time for this fight." He mounted his horse and pulled Nina up behind him. "We rode to Santa Fe," he said. The canyon behind them still echoed with the ghosts of gunfire. Ahead, the long road stretched wide under the climbing sun. And in her mind, Nina could still hear Jack's voice. What's under that floor could hang half the territory. Now she knew the truth. It could hang the whole damn country. Back on Dead Man's Ridge, Jack Mercer leaned against the blood-slick wall of the cabin, clutching his side. His shirt was soaked through, sticky and hot, but his hand still gripped the revolver like it was part of his soul. Eli Ramsey crouched beside him, reloading with shaking fingers. They'd held the line, just barely. The last of Monroe's men had fled minutes ago, leaving behind bodies and shattered windows. "You all right?" Eli asked. Jack coughed. "Took one in the ribs. Nothing vital." "You sure?" Jack grunted. "Still cussin', ain't I?" Eli managed a weak laugh. Silence settled between them. Then Jack spoke. "We did our part. Now it's on her." Eli looked out the window toward the horizon where dust still hung in the distance. "You think she made it?" Jack didn't answer right away, but in his gut he knew. "She made it," he said. Nina and Marshal Torrance arrive in Santa Fe to gather legal reinforcements, while Monroe prepares to silence everyone involved before the evidence reaches the courthouse. The gates of Santa Fe loomed large and stone-solid by midday sunlight, bouncing off the dusty adobe walls that circled the Capitol like a clenched fist. Nina Reyes held her breath as she and Marshal Clay Torrance rode through the narrow streets. The city buzzed, vendors calling out wares wagons, rattling over cobbled roads, and church bells ringing in the distance. But none of it touched her. She had one mission: get the evidence into the right hands before someone powerful made sure it never saw to daylight. Torrance rode ahead, every movement calm but deliberate. He was no stranger here. His badge still carried weight, even if he hadn't worn it full-time in years. When they reached the marshal's office, a narrow brick building near the courthouse, he dismounted and barked a name. "Deputy Graves." A lanky, nervous man in his 20s stumbled out of the doorway, half-buttoned uniform flapping in the wind. "Sir, I am Marshal Torrance. I thought you were retired." Torrance interrupted. "Well, bad news travels faster than age. We've got work. Get Judge Connolly, now." Connolly Graves blinked. "He's in session, then interrupt him," Torrance snapped. "Tell him I've got something that'll make history or start a war." Graves disappeared like a man chasing his own boots. Torrance turned to Nina. "You all right?" She didn't answer at first. Her fingers were locked around the satchel, knuckles pale. He softened. "They ain't gonna touch you here. Not while I'm breathing." She looked up at him, voice low. "It's not me I'm worried about. Jack and Eli, If we fail, they die for nothing. Torrance placed a hand on her shoulder. We're not gonna fail, but we've got one shot to do this clean. Once we open that satchel, there's no turning back. She nodded and followed him inside. The marshal's office was cramped, but had orderly maps on the walls, weapons locked in cases, shelves full of legal ledgers and hand-labeled files. Torrance led her into a side room and locked the door behind them. "Lay it out," he said. Nina placed the satchel on the table and emptied the contents: letters, deeds, maps, receipts, and the 5 sealed federal documents. Torrance flipped through each one methodically, his expression growing tighter with every page. They weren't just dirty, he muttered. They were organized, funded, protected. Elias Harper signed off on at least 6 transactions, Nina said. All of them laundered through Monroe and Judge Crane. Torrance's jaw flexed. Harper's no small fish. He reports to the Department of the Interior. If he goes down, D.C. takes a hit. A knock came at the door. Torrance opened it just enough to let Graves slip in, trailed by a man in a black coat, tall, grim-faced, with wire-rimmed glasses and an old scar down his jaw. Judge Connolly, Torrance greeted. "Appreciate the quick arrival." The judge stepped inside and glanced at Nina, then at the spread of documents. "Whatever this is," he said quietly, "it better be worth the firestorm you're about to light." Torrance handed him a letter. Connolly's eyebrows rose slowly as he read. This is Monroe's seal, and that one's Crane's," Torrance added, pointing to another. "And this federal. Harper." Connolly stared at the evidence, then back at Torrance. "You realize what you're putting on my desk?" "I do," Torrance said. Connolly folded his arms. "I'll need to convene a grand jury. We'll issue warrants, seize property, freeze accounts. You'll need protection too," Nina interrupted. "They kill to keep this buried." The judge nodded grimly. "Then we make it public. Today." He moved to the door, but paused. "What about witnesses?" Nina hesitated. 2. Jack Mercer and Eli Ramsey. They stayed behind to buy me time. Connolly's face hardened. "Then we better move fast. If they're still alive, it won't be for long." He left. Torrance turned to Graves. "Send riders to Red Hollow. Discreet. I want eyes on that cabin by nightfall." Graves nodded and ran out. Torrance poured 2 glasses of water and slid one to Nina. "You did it," he said quietly. She shook her head. "Not yet. Not until Monroe and Crane are in chains." Torrance took a long sip. "They won't go quietly, and they'll use every inch of power they got left." Nina's eyes burned. "Then we take it from them, inch by inch." Back in Red Hollow, Governor Thaddeus Monroe stood at the edge of the courthouse balcony, watching smoke drift over Dead Man's Ridge. His coat flapped in the wind, face unreadable. Judge Crane stood beside him, pale and sweating. "We lost the riders," Crane said. "She made it to Santa Fe." Monroe said nothing. Crane wiped his brow. We can still manage this. Burn the records. Discredit the girl. Frame Mercer as a radical. It's not too late." "It's already too late," Monroe said calmly. "They have the papers." Crane swallowed. "Then we run." Monroe turned to him, eyes colder than iron. "There is no running," he said. "We bury it again. Same way we did Hartwell. But Marshal Torrance is just a man, and men bleed." He turned from the balcony, voice low and final. "Call Harper." In Santa Fe, Judge Connolly stood before the press outside the courthouse steps, flanked by Torrance and 3 uniformed deputies. Behind them, Nina waited in the shadows, watching. Today, Connolly began holding up a sealed folder. We announced the opening of a grand jury investigation into allegations of corruption, fraud, and conspiracy involving high-ranking officials within the New Mexico Territory and beyond. The flash of cameras, the roar of reporters. Connolly didn't flinch. This investigation includes Governor Thaddeus Monroe, Judge Walter Crane, and several individuals affiliated with the federal government. A wave of gasps swept the crowd. Nina's chest tightened. This is it, she thought. The truth was no longer buried. But as the judge read the names, Torrance's eyes flicked to a man standing far off by a stagecoach suit, pressed hat low, face hidden in shadow. When the list reached Harper's name, the man turned and vanished into the crowd. Torrance muttered, "They're already moving pieces." Nina looked at him. What now? Torrance drew his revolver, slowly, eyes on the horizon. Now we play for keeps. Monroe and Harper launch a counteroffensive using federal agents and bounty hunters to eliminate loose ends, including Jack and Eli, before the trial can begin. The desert had a strange way of hiding death. The morning sun cast long golden fingers across Dead Man's Ridge, bathing the earth in warmth, even as the air hung thick with gunpowder and blood. Jack Mercer sat slumped against the cabin wall, one hand pressed to his wounded side, the other still wrapped around his revolver. Eli Ramsey crouched beside him, watching the horizon. Neither man spoke for a long while. "I thought we were dead last night," Eli muttered finally. "We still might be." Jack replied, eyes half-lidded but sharp. "Just not yet." They'd buried 3 of Monroe's men in the early morning hours. The rest had fled, leaving behind spent cartridges, boot prints, and the undeniable truth they would come again. Eli rose and walked to the edge of the ridge. He pulled a spyglass from his coat and scanned the horizon. Then he froze. "What is it?" Jack asked. Eli didn't answer immediately. "Riders," he said at last. "Not locals. Suits, Eastern saddles. And they're moving fast." Jack pushed himself up with a groan. "Federal looks like," Eli said. "But not the kind that files papers. These boys are here to clean up a mess." Jack steadied himself against the wall. "Then we don't have time to wait for rescue." Eli gave him a look. "You can barely stand." "I don't have to stand," Jack said, pulling on his coat with a grunt. "I just have to ride." They packed quickly, Jack's revolver, Eli's shotgun, and what little food they had left. The rest they left behind. As they saddled up, Jack paused. What Eli asked. Jack looked back at the cabin, at the fresh graves nearby, at the bullet holes in the wood. "It's all coming down," Jack said quietly. "Not just Monroe. The whole damn system." Eli mounted up. "Then let's live long enough to see it fall." They rode out at full speed, cutting away from the known roads, angling southeast toward the low mesas, where the scrub was thick and the land offered hiding places. Behind them, the federal riders followed like a storm on the wind. Meanwhile, in the governor's mansion in Red Hollow, Thaddeus Monroe stood before a wide mirror, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored coat. The room was filled with smoke sweet from cigars and bitter from rage. Across from him, Elias Harper stood in silence, hands clasped behind his back. "They've got enough to bury you," Harper said calmly. "Me too." Monroe didn't flinch. "Then we burn it all down first." He turned from the mirror, eyes like flint. "I want every witness eliminated. Mercer, Ramsey, the woman, the preacher. Hell, even Torrance if you can manage it." Harper raised an eyebrow. We're not gods, Thaddeus. We can't stop the sun from rising. No, Monroe agreed. But we can make sure it rises over a graveyard. Harper pulled a small notebook from his coat and flipped it open. I've activated private assets, he said. 3 federal marshals loyal to me, and 2 Pinkertons on retainer. They'll track down Mercer and Ramsey. I'll deal with the girl and the judge. Monroe poured a glass of whiskey, and Torrance Harper smiled faintly. Let's see how far honor carries him when he's standing over a coffin. Back in Santa Fe, Nina Reyes stepped into the courthouse holding a fresh affidavit in her hand. The grand jury had been sworn in. Connolly had issued the first warrants. Monroe's bank accounts were frozen. The names of Crane and Harper had been added to a formal investigation. Everything was moving. But so was danger. She passed Torrance in the hallway. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept since the morning she arrived. You heard from them, she asked. No, he said. Not yet. Nina frowned. We should send another rider. I already did. Yesterday. And Torrance paused. He didn't come back. That silence said everything. Nina lowered her voice. We need to go ourselves. Torrance met her eyes. You sure I owe them more than waiting? The marshal sighed. Then we leave tonight. Quiet. No press. No trail. As they turned toward his office, a man stepped out from a nearby room. Tall. Black suit. Hat tipped low. Nina reached for her revolver, but Torrance held up a hand. I know him. The man nodded. Marshal, Tobias Reed Torrance said. Used to work in Kansas Territory, before the Bureau got a hold of him. Reed looked at Nina. They've set the dogs loose, ma'am. Monroe's riding was desperate. Harper's cutting deals behind closed doors, and 3 marshals are already on their way to kill Mercer and Ramsey. Torrance cursed. Reed continued, I ain't officially in this fight, but I'm here to tell you whatever cards you're playing, play them now, because the game's rigged and the house doesn't lose twice. Nina stepped forward. Can you get us out? I can get you close, Reed said, but you'll have to run the last leg blind. Torrance didn't hesitate. We'll take it. That night, under a moonless sky, they slipped out of Santa Fe with fresh horses and a wagon marked for medical transport. Reed drove face expressionless, while Torrance and Nina rode ahead under black cloaks. By dawn, they were halfway to Red Hollow. In the distance, smoke curled into the sky. Torrance spotted it first. That's the ridge, he said, narrowing his eyes. That's where Jack was. Nina's heart twisted. You think they're still there? No, Torrance said. But whatever happened, someone didn't walk away clean. They pressed on, leaving the wagon behind, cutting through the scrub and brush, the desert heat rising fast around them. By midday, they reached the cabin, what was left of it. Charred wood, splintered beams, a burned-out door swinging in the wind. Nina dropped to her knees, sifting through the ashes. But there were no bodies, no signs of graves, just a message carved into the side of a scorched plank, still breathing, still fighting. Jack. She stood, breath-catching. Torrance exhaled. Then they're out there. And we're not too late, Nina said. But she knew Monroe's men were already closing in. They had one chance to find Jack and Eli before the noose did. She looked at Torrance. We finished this. Even if it kills us. Jack and Eli evade capture and make a risky move heading toward Albuquerque to leak evidence to a neutral press source, while Nina and Torrance follow their trail and prepare for the final confrontation. The sun beat down mercilessly as Jack Mercer and Eli Ramsey cut across the dry scrubland toward the western tracks that led to Albuquerque. Their horses were weary ribs showing hooves caked in red dust. Jack's side throbbed with every jolt, but he kept his gaze fixed ahead, jaw clenched against the pain. They'd been riding for 2 days straight, sleeping in quick shifts under brush cover, avoiding towns, circling back to lose their tails. But Monroe's men, especially the two Pinkertons, were relentless. "Albuquerque's the last stop," Jack muttered as they crested a ridge and looked down at the sprawling train junction far below. "We get the papers into the hands of someone who doesn't flinch. We finally get ahead of this." Eli squinted against the glare. "You sure the paper here ain't already bought?" Jack reached into his coat and pulled out a small, water-stained envelope. This was in Hartwell's satchel. It's addressed to a man named Simeon Keller, editor of the Rio Sentinel. Handwritten note, "The last honest press left in New Mexico." Eli snorted. "That's a hell of a title to live up to." Jack nudged his horse forward. "Let's hope he does." They reached the outer edges of Albuquerque just before dusk, slipping in through the southern flats near the river. The city was alive with heat and sound, cowboys gambling in dusty saloons, trains screeching in and out of the station, kids chasing dogs through open-air markets. Jack pulled his hat low, keeping his face in shadow. The Sentinel's office was tucked between a cigar shop and a rail agent's office. A faded wooden sign hung crooked above the door paint, peeling from the edges. But the windows were clean, and the front step swept a sign someone still cared about truth here. They dismounted and tied their horses loosely out back, just in case they had to run again. Jack knocked twice. The door creaked open. A wiry man in his 60s stood behind the threshold, sleeves rolled ink on his fingertips. His eyes scanned them with the suspicion of someone who'd seen one too many messengers and far too few truths. "You Keller?" Jack asked. "Depends who's askin'," the man said. Jack handed him the envelope. Keller opened it, read the first line. His face changed. "You boys better come inside." Inside, the office was cramped and smelled like dust paper and tobacco. Hand-set type cases lined the walls. A printing press rattled slowly in the corner, manned by a kid who barely looked 15. Keller cleared a space on his desk. Jack dropped the satchel. I opened it. The editor stared at the contents: signed orders, forged deeds, correspondence between Monroe and Harper, a full ledger of payoffs. He sat down slowly. "I always knew this territory stank," he said. "Didn't know the rot went all the way to D.C. Eli leaned against the door. "It does." Keller looked at them hard. "You want me to print this? We want you to blow it wide open," Jack said. "Name every man, show every signature. No secrets, no delay. You're gonna get me killed." Jack didn't blink. "You print it, you save this place. You bury it, we all die anyway." Keller nodded slowly. "I'll need 3 hours. "You've got 2, Jack said. "They're coming." Keller shouted for his boy to prepare the press. Pages were cleared, typeset. Jack and Eli helped stack and sort as fast as they could, every hand stained with ink and urgency. Outside, thunder rumbled, but it wasn't the sky. Eli stepped out onto the street, scanned the alley, then cursed under his breath. Pinkertons, 2 blocks east, moving fast. Jack grabbed Keller by the shoulder. "Start printing, now." Then he and Eli ran. They led the hunters away from the press, doubling back through alleys, darting across yards, ducking through a stable, and out the rear fence. Gunshots cracked behind them, close, but not yet fatal. A bullet clipped Jack's coat. "Keep moving," he shouted. They rounded the corner and crashed into the side of a cantina. Jack's side exploded in pain, but he forced himself on. Then hooves, coming fast, not from behind, from ahead. Jack raised his revolver, then froze. Nina. She galloped into view on a chestnut mare with Torrance right behind her. They skidded to a stop. "You look like hell," Nina said. "Feels worse," Jack replied, almost laughing. Torrance dismounted. "You've got company behind you." "We know," Eli said. "We let him here." "Figures." Torrance grunted, then tossed Jack a spare rifle. "Well, let's even the odds." They took up positions in the alley, waiting. The first Pinkerton came in low and fast. Torrance dropped him with a single clean shot. The second hesitated. Mistake. Jack hit him in the shoulder and Nina knocked him down with a follow-up. Silence fell again. Eli grinned. Still got it. Sirens rang through the square, marshal whistles. More lawmen arriving. But not Monroe's. Real ones. Torrance turned to Jack. "Did you get it from Keller?" Jack nodded. "He's printing now." They all looked toward the distant press office. And sure enough, a few minutes later, the sound began. Click, slam, click, slam. The first pages started rolling off the press. Jack closed his eyes and leaned against the wall. For the first time, he said softly, "They don't get to write the story." The next morning, the Rio Sentinel published the full front-page exposé. Names, documents, quotes, even photographs taken from Monroe's own archives. The paper spread like wildfire across towns, to the capital, to Washington itself. No one could deny it now. But with truth came danger. Harper, reading the paper from his office in D.C., crushed his teacup in his hand. Monroe, locked in his estate, ordered the last play. "Burn the courthouse," he told Crane, "and hang every last one of them if they testify." The noose was tightening, but so was the resolve of those left standing. As the truth spreads, Monroe makes his final power play, kidnapping Judge Connolly and issuing a bounty on Nina, Jack, and Torrance, forcing them to storm the courthouse before the trial is buried forever. The church bell in Santa Fe rang at noon as a rider burst through the main street, his coat flapping wildly and his horse foaming at the mouth. The people who had gathered outside the courthouse, clutching fresh copies of the Rio Sentinel, turned in alarm. Marshal Clay Torrance caught the message as it was shoved into his hands. Judge Connolly taken. Red Hollow. Trial canceled. Monroe is making his move. Beneath it, hastily scrawled in the corner. 1 day left before the evidence is destroyed. Or worse. Torrance read it twice before shoving it into his coat. "He's not even hiding anymore," Nina muttered, her voice shaking. "He's just doing it in daylight now." Jack Mercer stood beside her shoulder, wrapped in gauze, his shirt stained red. His eyes burned with something between fury and determination. "He knows it's almost over," Jack said, "and desperate men always go loud before they go down." "Then we go louder," Torrance replied. "Connolly's the last domino. If Monroe controls the courthouse, he controls the verdict. We can't let that happen." Eli Ramsey finished adjusting the strap on his rifle. "So what's the plan?" "Because I assume it's going to be the kind that gets us all shot." Jack gave a small grin. "Only if we do it right." They gathered inside the marshal's office, Jack, Nina, Eli, Torrance, and 2 deputies still loyal to the badge. On the table lay a crude, hand-drawn map of Red Hollow, the courthouse, the sheriff's station, the jailhouse, guard rotations from memory. Torrance pointed at the old freight tunnel running beneath the street. "They use this for transporting prisoners when they don't want the crowd to see. If they're holding Connolly, it'll be in the basement cell under the courthouse." Jack leaned in. And the evidence probably locked in the judge's chambers or burned by morning. We will go tonight then, Nina said. While they're still scrambling. Torrance nodded. We go fast, we go quiet, and we go together. You get the judge, I'll handle Monroe. Eli raised an eyebrow. You say that like it's gonna be simple. Torrance looked him dead in the eye. It won't be. But it'll be just. They rode out by dusk under the cover of wind and dust storms rolling down from the Sangre de Cristos. Red Hollow was quiet when they arrived. Too quiet. The air tasted like fire and fear. They ditched the horses behind the chapel and split. Nina and Eli would take the tunnel beneath the courthouse. Jack and Torrance would move on the front, create noise and draw fire. As Jack adjusted his revolver, Nina stopped him. Are you sure you're good for this? She asked. He gave her a look. I came all this way to make things right. 1 more mile won't kill me. Then he paused, stepping closer. If something happens to me, finish it. No matter what. She nodded. Same goes for you. Then they vanished into the dark. Jack and Torrance moved through the narrow back alleys of Red Hollow, past shuttered windows and trembling doors. Every corner felt like a trap. Every creak of wood felt like a trigger. At the edge of the square, they stopped. The courthouse stood like a stone beast lit from inside, guarded by 4 armed men at the doors. Inside, they could hear muffled voices, Monroe's voice barking orders growing more unhinged by the minute. Torrance looked at Jack. You know what they say about dragons? Jack cocked his revolver. What? Torrance smirked. You don't wait for him to sleep. You light the fire first. They stepped into the light. Gunfire cracked instantly. Torrance fired once clean. 1 guard dropped. Jack dropped to 1 knee, took another. Chaos exploded in the square. Inside the tunnel, Nina and Eli crept through the damp passage, weapons drawn breath shallow. The tunnel forked twice before sloping upward beneath the courthouse basement. They found the door half open. Inside, Judge Connolly. Beaten, bloodied, but alive. Nina, he gasped. They're going to destroy the papers. Monroe. He's going to burn it all. Eli moved fast, cutting the judge free while Nina scouted the exit. More guards were coming, heavy boots echoing down the tunnel. Can you walk? She asked Connolly. Not well, he muttered. But I can testify. They slipped out into the basement and up the stairs, Eli taking point. A guard lunged from the corner, but Nina shot first. Upstairs, the battle raged. Jack kicked open the double doors to the main chamber. And there he was. Governor Thaddeus Monroe, standing behind the judge's podium like he owned the damn world. Beside him, Crane Harper and 2 men with rifles. Jack raised his gun. End of the line. Monroe didn't even blink. No, he said. It's just the beginning of the reckoning. He signaled. Harper moved to torch a stack of documents, nearby evidence from Keller's paper rounded up overnight. Torrance shot him in the leg. Harper collapsed, screaming. Crane reached for a pistol. Jack didn't hesitate. 1 shot dropped him. Monroe stood frozen. Then he lunged not for a gun, but for the judge's gavel. I built this territory, he screamed. You think you can judge me? I am the law. Jack stepped forward. No, he said. You were a lie. And it ends now. He struck Monroe across the face with the butt of his gun. The man dropped like a sack of dirt. Sirens echoed outside. Real ones. From deputies, marshals, townsfolk who had read the paper and finally stopped being afraid. Torrance looked around the room. Bodies smoke law. We just rewrote the ending, he said. Nina, Eli, and Connolly burst through the back hall. The judge, limping but upright, took the bench and slammed his hand down. This court is in session. The next morning, Monroe was behind bars. Harper had been taken into federal custody. Judge Crane's death sparked a formal inquest into corruption in 3 territories. But it wasn't over yet. Jack sat on the courthouse steps, staring at the rising sun. His side still hurt. His hands were scraped. But there was light in the sky, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel fake. Nina sat beside him. "You think it sticks?" she asked. Jack thought for a long time before answering. "No lie lasts forever," he said, "and some truths are heavier than bullets." With the trial underway and public attention at its peak, a new threat emerges: someone from inside the federal government who wants the truth buried again, forcing Jack and Nina to decide how far they'll go, though, to keep the fight alive. The trial of Thaddeus Monroe began under the blinding heat of a Santa Fe summer. The courthouse swarmed with reporters, guards, and citizens packed elbow to elbow in every pew. Judge Connolly presided with a bruised jaw and fire in his eyes. Nina Reyes sat just behind the prosecutor, the satchel of original documents chained to her wrist, like a final reminder that truth wasn't just found, it had to be protected. Jack Mercer leaned against the far wall, his arm in a sling, revolver still strapped at his hip, despite the judge's half-hearted protests. Torrance stood near the doorway, scanning the room like a wolf sniffing out predators. And predators there were. "You see that man in the back row?" Torrance murmured. Jack turned subtly. A tall, clean-cut man in a gray federal coat, face unreadable. "Doesn't belong," Jack said. "Washington type," Torrance replied. "Name's Spencer Baines, Department of the Interior. Harper's replacement, apparently." "What's he doing here?" Torrance narrowed his eyes. "Making sure we don't dig deeper than we're allowed." Up front, the prosecution began laying out the charges: conspiracy to defraud the U.S. government, falsifying land claims, bribery, and obstruction of justice. Monroe sat behind the defense table, pale and deflated, but not beaten. His eyes tracked every word. Calculating. Always calculating. But when the prosecutor presented the first signed letter from Monroe to Harper, ordering the suppression of homestead records, there was a collective gasp in the courtroom. Even Baines shifted in his seat. Connolly turned to the defense. "Do you deny this document's authenticity?" Monroe's lawyer, a slick-haired man from Chicago, rose. "Your Honor, we object to the source of this material. It was obtained illegally, stolen from private property." Before Connolly could respond, Nina stood. "It wasn't stolen," she said clearly. "It was preserved, hidden by Samuel Hartwell after Monroe had him killed." Monroe's face twitched. Connolly looked between them. "Ms. Reyes, you're not on the witness list." "I'm adding myself," she said. "I have the original letter, and I was there when we opened that floorboard." The judge nodded. "Let her speak." She took the stand, hands steady despite the storm rising in her chest. She told them everything about the cabin, the map, the pursuit, the shootouts, the torching of Red Hollow. Every name. Everybody is buried for the sake of control. When she was done, silence fell. Jack saw Baines scribbling notes furiously, his face darkening. During recess, Jack pulled Nina aside. "He's going to shut it down." She nodded. "I saw it too." Just then Torrance returned from the hallway, jaw tight. "Baines just met with 2 military officers," he said. "They're not here for protection. They're here to retrieve evidence." Nina's heart thudded. "He's going to declare the trial a national security matter." Jack cursed under his breath. If that happens, it all gets buried again. They reconvened in the side office where the satchel was being guarded. The documents are still intact. For now. We've got one move left, Jack said. Torrance crossed his arms. And it's going to get us locked up. Maybe, Jack said. But if the government buries this trial, we have to take it above them. Take it to the people again. Nina looked up. You mean the press? Keller's ready, Jack said. He said if we get shut down, he'll run the full story, every page, every detail, and we'll get it on every paper between here and New York. Torrance ran a hand over his face. All right. But that means getting the documents out of this courthouse before Baines gets his hands on them. Just then, the door opened. Deputy Graves entered pale. They're issuing a federal hold on all trial materials. The judge's chambers are being sealed by military order. Jack looked at Nina. That's it. We are moving now. They acted fast. Torrance caused a distraction on the courthouse steps, loudly arguing with one of the military officers, drawing a small crowd. Meanwhile, Nina and Jack slipped through the side hall into the records room. Eli, waiting inside, had already unlocked the cabinet. The satchel went back over Nina's shoulder, the original files packed into hidden pockets. They left the decoys behind blank folders, meaningless ledgers. As they reached the back exit, a voice rang out behind them. You're making a mistake. It was Baines. He stood at the end of the hallway, flanked by two soldiers. You don't know what's coming, he said. You think you've won a victory. But there are larger forces at play here. We're not going to let a few frontier nobodies tear down the structure of the Union. Jack stepped forward. If your Union rests on lies, maybe it deserves to fall. Baines's eyes narrowed. We can charge you with sedition. Go ahead, Nina snapped, but we'll already be gone. And with that, they slipped out the service door into the crowded market beyond. Blending, moving. They rode out that night, splitting up. Jack and Eli heading toward Colorado with one copy, Nina and Torrance heading south with another. As they vanished into the desert, Jack thought about the trial, the people still inside the fight, not yet finished. But he knew one thing for certain. When truth becomes a threat, you know you've struck the right nerve. With the trial sabotaged, the characters regroup in secret to release the full story to the national press, forcing a public reckoning and putting everything on the line one last time for justice. The morning the first edition hit New York newsstands, the city didn't know it was about to change. The front page of the National Gazette screamed across every corner stall and cafe table, New Mexico, conspiracy exposed. Federal corruption unveiled in leaked dossier. Underneath it was a photograph, grainy but undeniable, of Thaddeus Monroe in handcuffs. Elias Harper's forged signature on federal land orders and a pull quote from Nina Reyes, the truth, was never missing. It was just buried, and we dug it out, one page at a time. Within hours, the story was picked up by every major outlet. By noon, Washington was issuing denials. By sunset, subpoenas. Jack Mercer stood on the edge of a bluff outside Trinidad, Colorado, the wind tugging at his coat. Below him, trains whistled through the canyons, hauling livestock passengers and now truth. Newspapers bound for every city west of the Mississippi carried the story he'd risked everything to tell. Eli Ramsey walked up beside him, chewing a twig like it might calm the storm in his chest. You think it's enough? Eli asked. Jack watched the train vanish behind a ridge. It has to be. They were marked men now. Baines had made that clear with a warrant quietly posted in 3 territories. National security, leak, the notice read. Subject to detainment. But Jack didn't care anymore. The story was out. The lie was broken. In Santa Fe, Judge Connolly resumed court under heavy protection. His ruling was brief but thunderous. Thaddeus Monroe was convicted on all charges. Harper, under investigation, had fled the Capitol, but was intercepted by a junior congressman who had read the exposé and refused to be bought. The tide had shifted. Nina Reyes stood outside the Rio Sentinel watching Keller oversee a second printing. This one wasn't just about Monroe, it was about what came after. The survivors, the whistleblowers, the towns that stood up, the quiet men and women who passed on the story when they could have burned it. She held a fresh copy in her hand, eyes scanning the last paragraph. Her name was now no longer a shadow, no longer just a courier. Inside, Keller was working with two new writers. One of them was Eliza Moore, a young woman from Red Hollow who'd lost her father to Monroe's schemes. She was 19, but wrote like she'd lived 1,000 lives. "You've started something," Keller told Nina. "They'll try to stop it." "Then we won't stop printing," Nina said. "Truth spreads faster when people finally believe it matters." Out in the desert, Marshall Torrance rode alone. He wasn't going back to Santa Fe. Not yet. There were still too many graves without names, too many good folks scared into silence. He planned to change that. Town by town. Badge or no badge. He stopped at an old mission house where a school had once been shut down by Crane's orders. He dropped a stack of newspapers at the door and handed the teacher a slip of paper. "If they try to silence you, hand them this." It was a copy of the indictment, with Connolly's seal. The woman blinked back tears. "Thank you, Marshall." Torrance tipped his hat and rode on. By the end of the summer, Monroe was sentenced to life in a federal prison in Kansas. He never spoke during the trial, never confessed. But the photograph of him arriving at the gates, head down, cuffs tight, became the symbol of a new era in the West. No more kings, no more shadows, just men. Accountable. The Department of the Interior launched an internal review. Dozens of officials resigned. Others were indicted. Baines was reassigned to a desk job in Alaska, a political exile for a man used to pulling levers in secret. But it wasn't all victory. Not everyone got justice. Some names stayed buried. Some graves never got markers. And some voices, the quiet ones who never made it out, remained unheard. Jack thought about them every day. He met Nina again months later in a small cafe on the outskirts of Denver. She wore a navy coat, her hair shorter now, her eyes still sharp. "Are you staying put?" she asked, sipping coffee. Jack shook his head. "No. Thought I'd head north. Maybe Wyoming. Heard they're opening up the range again." "Running or looking?" He paused. "Maybe both." She smiled. "I've been offered a job," she said. "Investigative work. Real pay. Real bylines. Deserved." She glanced out the window. "You ever think about what would have happened if we never opened that floorboard?" Jack didn't answer right away. Then finally, we'd still be sleeping through the lie. They sat in silence a while longer, the sounds of the cafe soft behind them. The world was changing slowly, unevenly, but moving forward. When they parted, Nina handed Jack a copy of the newest Sentinel edition. Inside was an editorial she'd written. The last paragraph stuck with him all the way into the mountains. "We don't win by burying the past. We win by exhuming it, holding it to the light, letting it burn or bloom as it must. The fight for truth isn't a moment, it's a habit. And like all habits, it's forged by the choices we make when no one's watching."